every one of you for being here tonight. I realize that when your son, when your daughter, when your child comes to high school, they think they're already grown up. And there's a lot of parents who think that it's time to let their kids stand on their own and not get involved. But what I can tell you, high school is the best time to get more involved in your student's life. And part of that is coming to opportunities like this to support your students' education. So although your child might not want you to come and talk to their teachers because they have it all under control, deep down, they appreciate the fact that you're here. So thank you for being here. A couple other reminders. Number one, when you walk in the front door, I see a lot of people holding a map of our school. The map is not going to help you find anything. You can look at it, and you can turn it around, and you are going to get lost. So the best thing you can do is find a student wearing a green shirt. Are you filming right now as I'm pointing at the camera? Find a student wearing a green shirt, and they will be able to point you in the right direction of what hallway or what level you need to go down. Finally, I've got a little present for everyone. We bought a whole bunch of these car decals. As you walk out, they're going to be on a table out there. They'll be on the table in the commons. If you have a car, I would love for you to put this on your bumper. Put it on your, it's a decal, it's on a sticker, so you can take it off real easy. But I love when I'm driving around and I see Spartan heads all over town. I'm going to introduce Dr. O'Rourke here in a second. When Dr. O'Rourke pulled in, I noticed he had a ton of bumper stickers on his car. He didn't read the fine print in his contract that said if you come and speak at our school, you have to put one of these on. So I'm going to hand this to you as you walk up, and before you drive away, I'm going to need to see that it's on your car someplace. Well, I'm going to introduce Dr. O'Rourke, and he's going to talk to you for about 45 minutes. But Dr. O'Rourke is the Director of Training and Communication and a clinical psychologist in the Child Anxiety and Eating Disorder Center at the Evidence-Based Treatment Center of Seattle. Dr. O'Rourke holds an adjunct faculty position for the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington and runs an affiliated practicum site to help train UW PhD students. He has advanced training and specialization in the treatment of anxiety disorders and OCD in children and adults. I am super excited that he's here today. Let's put our Spartan hands together and welcome Dr. O'Rourke.
Hi everyone. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Hennig, for inviting me to come and talk today. It's a privilege. I am going to talk about anxiety and stress and focus really on what parents can do to help mitigate these issues when they get too much, just to give a few tools that you can sort of walk away with. I will be staying afterwards if you have any questions. So when I finish, if you have anything, I'll just hang out in the corner over there and you can find it. So I'll start by going through the difference between anxiety, stress, and fear. And then I'm just really going to hone in on the different strategies you can use in your homes. Okay, so stress is a really, really broad concept, and everyone experiences stress. Everyone also experiences anxiety and fear. But stress isn't necessarily anxiety, but anxiety is a part of stress. So stress can be caused by lots of things, lots of different emotions, life experiences. Think of it as a very, very broad tool, and your body's just reacting to the environment. Anxiety is a response to an anticipated threat. So something bad that you think is going to happen in the future, that is, when your body's reacting to that, it is anxiety. I have a presentation coming tomorrow, I start to get anxious about it. It's my anticipated threat. Fear is an actual threat. So you put a snake in the middle of here, I'm going to feel fear about the snake that I see right here and right now. And I just want to introduce these ideas so we know what we're talking about when we use the terms stress and anxiety, which are the main focus. So usually, everyone can relate to this. Everyone feels more stress, and everyone can feel more relaxed. And these things are supposed to shift over time. Now, you are all parents of teenagers, for better and for worse. The lines can be a little higher sometimes, but that's normal, and that's sort of how it's supposed to go. So, exam time, these things can get a little bit worse. But we typically expect the body to sort of pull things together and sort of get through it. So this is a normal experience. When stress gets too much, the body it tries to react and increase its response to sort of deal with the situation. And sometimes the stress continues too long and it can't. So this model that you see here is actually based a bit on a medical model, like a response to an infection, but it applies for mental health too. So basically, a stress happens like, I'm going to come back to exams because they're the big one. So you have an exam in a week's time. The person gets alarmed, and initially they feel a little overwhelmed, which is that tiny little dip you see. But then their body starts to respond to it, and this is the resistance phase. They start studying for their exam. So they're responding to the stress, and they start studying, and hopefully they feel prepared. The anxiety, the stress sort of reduce, and they do okay on the exam. But sometimes, if the stress continues for too long, they can't do it anymore and they burn out, right? That's called the exhaustion phase. And we see this in teenagers when, for example, the most common one that I see is they're in a sports team, they're hanging out with their friends, they've got to get 4.0 across subjects, and this has to happen year in, year out. That's too much. And sometimes it just causes exhaustion, and then kids burn out, and they stop doing their homework, they feel really down, stop hanging out with friends, they might get anxious, some kids stop going to school. That's when we see things sort of not going so well. And my job today is to try and talk about how do we avoid the exhaustion phase, what do we do when anxiety and stress are going a little too much. So the data on stress is massive. If you do a search for this, it's pretty ridiculous how much research has been done. So basically, if you think of a health condition, it's probably been researched, and high stress probably makes it worse, right? So it can be a bad thing. Later on, we're going to talk about how it's a good thing. So these are just some examples that obviously we don't like. So it can cause higher rates of anxiety and depression. It's linked to things like cancer, diabetes, and so on. There's different indicators that you as parents can look out for when stress gets a little bit too much. And physically, if you notice any of these signs, that can just be completely normal, right? Like everyone experiences these to some extent. But if you start noticing that your kid is having a lot of headaches, stomach aches, they're complaining of these things, they might just be ill. However, if these things continue and you see a pattern, that's where they might not just be ill. Maybe they're overloaded. Maybe their immune system's a little bit weaker because of the high stress. It's just a sign. You don't have to panic with sort of putting these things together. The next one to notice is cognitive. And you probably look at this and just think that's a teenager to some extent. Negative outlook in particular. Very snappy. You say, how's your day? And they're like, good. But again, if you're noticing a change from the kid that you know and love, these are some cognitive changes that we might be looking out for and saying, maybe they're having a hard time, maybe they're a little bit over it. Emotionally, you're probably also thinking, is this a teenager? And yes, you're right. But again, we're looking for or you're looking for when you see a change in the kid that you know, and it's going on for a few weeks, it's sort of indicating that something's up. It might be that they're breaking up with someone and there's something to do with that, but it might be that they're overloaded, they've got too much on their plate. And then finally, and this is what I think the biggest concern is the behavioral changes. And these are often the most noticeable, because you can't read your kid's mind, you don't always know how they're feeling. Often we look in clinical psychology for the behaviors that we see. And this is like the best sign, in my opinion, of when someone's overloaded. So when you see a lot of sleep problems, when you see them not hanging out with your friends, when kids stop going to school, they're refusing to go to school anymore, losing weight or gaining weight because their food eating changes are happening, or just avoidance. And I capitalize avoidance because it's the biggest one. So when your kid doesn't want to do stuff anymore, basically, that's when you've got to just be asking yourself, is this just because they don't want to do stuff and that's okay and I'm going to respect that? Is this because they're overloaded? These are just signs. So, let me pull this short. Okay. So I've talked about how stress is bad. I want to talk a little bit about how it's so good. So everyone experiences stress and anxiety, and if you didn't, you would probably be dead, right? Because you wouldn't, when you walk to a road, you wouldn't think, well, there's a car coming, better not walk out in front of the car, right? That just wouldn't occur to you if you didn't have any stress or anxiety. You just go on your way and you get hit by a car, and you'll be all right. These systems are in your brain because they help you survive. They help you identify something that could be a danger to you and take an action. So again, they help people by saying, I have a test coming up, I probably should study for that test, right? I've got a party to go to, I probably should shower before I go to that party, right? It's really important that you have these in your system. So I don't want to just diss on stress and anxiety, because they are probably the most important emotional system that you have in your body. I do want to diss on it when it gets a little bit too much. So I think about it like a fire alarm system, to know sort of when is anxiety a problem, when is it not. So if you think of a fire alarm, it's supposed to go off when there's a fire, okay? It's also supposed to go off when there's a smoke caused by a fire. But when kids have anxiety that's sort of over the top, the fire alarm is reacting either too strongly to smoke, or more commonly, it's reacting to stuff that shouldn't set it off. So I think my fire alarm at home, it goes off. I mean, I actually just had to disable it, it's ridiculous. It goes off when I boil water. And it's so frustrating, because I want it up in case there's a fire. Because it goes off all the time, I can't trust it. So when it's going off when I breathe, or when I turn on the tap, or when I boil water, it's not very helpful to me anymore. It's just going off all the time. And when I think about anxiety that's unhelpful, this is what I'm thinking of. It's a kid's anxious brain is responding to this threat and this threat and this threat as if they're threats, but maybe we think actually they're not threats, right? There's not a fire, there's not smoke. So, for example, if I were to say just a simple phobia, so a kid with a fear of dogs, right? So sometimes you see this, they're afraid of dogs, and they're afraid a dog's going to bite me. Yes, some dogs do bite. But most of us, when we see a dog, we wouldn't get anxious about that dog being in the room. We wouldn't think, that dog's dog's going to run at me and go straight to my throat, right? Like, we wouldn't see it as a threat. Our alarm system wouldn't be going off. But to the kid with high anxiety, that is what happens. That's a threat. And our job as parents is to teach our kid, like, you can deal with that threat. You can get through this. You can cope with this. And that's what I want to start focusing on now. So, in psychology, we have a bunch of different, like, what we call sort of disorders. They're just sort of names for different anxious behaviors that we see. It doesn't really matter too much what they're called, because honestly, we don't really care that much. I more care about what's happening and what we're going to do about it. So we know that the prevalence of anxiety and anxiety disorders is really, really high, and in fact, there's some data that it might be increasing. But we're looking at 35% of kids would meet criteria for an anxiety disorder within their lifetime. And at any one time, we're looking at maybe 15–20% of kids. So, right, in any one classroom, that's like 5 different people are dealing with a different anxiety issue. So this is a really, really common thing, and something we should all be talking about and acknowledging. And there's 2 different ways to deal with anxiety and 2 different ways to deal with stress. So one camp is treating it, getting rid of it so that our brain no longer says that is dangerous, and instead learns that is safe and cope with it. The other camp says, well, if you're anxious, there are some things we can do to manage your anxiety, to help sort of calm the situation and help you get on with it. But it's not necessarily treating the issue. So the way I think about it is like, if you have a headache that's caused by something, ibuprofen might deal with the symptoms a little bit and help you feel a little better. But maybe there's something causing the headache, such as, I don't know, stress. Treating that might stop you having headaches in general, right? That's my usual way of thinking about it. So we'll spend most time on talking about what parents can do. So the first one is very basic, and you probably all know this, but looking after your own body. So exercise and eating are really important, and there's some really good data on the role of exercise in particular for managing anxiety and also depression. Regular exercise, and usually the guidelines are like 30 minutes a day, which is, it's somewhat arbitrary, but basically we don't want kids sitting at computer screens all day, which is probably something a lot of you are writing. But this is a really useful tool that we want to figure out, like, how can you make sure that your kids are exercising and thinking, like, are they involved in sports? Can they walk to school in any way? What can I get them involved in to help them moving a bit? And then the last one, in terms of like looking after your body, is sleep. So sleep is, I was listening to this podcast, and it was still saying that if there were 2 interventions to improve mental health and school performance, it would be eating breakfast and eating lunch and getting enough sleep. Right? Of all of the interventions that we have, those would be the 2 things. And we know that teenagers don't get enough sleep. The recommendation for high schoolers is somewhere around 8 to 10 hours. Right? And you're probably thinking, my kid does not get 8 to 10 hours. Because they're not tired until about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and they have to start waking up at 6, sometimes 5:30. Like, how do they fit in that time? And it's a real challenge. Just recently, the Seattle School District did this awesome study. They changed the start time. You may have heard of this. They changed the start time, so they switched the younger kids to an earlier start time and the older kids to a later start time. The reason being that adolescents, their circadian rhythm shifts a little bit so that they're not getting tired until later on at night. So Seattle schools tried to say, well, if they can start later, they might be able to get more sleep, that might help their performance. So they followed 2 different groups of kids over a couple of years to test this out, and the results were really interesting. By doing this, on average, they were getting just about 30 minutes of extra sleep by having a later start time, which made such a difference. So they weren't staying up on screens. So it wasn't like because they start later, they stay up later. So the first thing was teenagers did not stay up later. Their scores on mental health measures were improved, their grades were improved, and they were less sleepy during the day. And they measured this with, not just with questionnaires, but they were wearing essentially like some of them had like a smartwatch to sort of measure their activity and sleep. It was a really, really interesting study. So thinking about what can be done at home in your house to help us sleep when your kid might not want to go to sleep. So the number one thing I would probably be talking about, the major culprit of why sleep is interrupted, outside of advocating for later start times in schools, is screens, which is everyone's nemesis, right? Everyone in this room probably fights with their teenager about their phone, about their computer. And the data is not great. So you'll see in the media, like screens sort of ruin your teen's life. And we don't have very good research on it because smartphones only came out in like 2008. Right? That's probably not enough time to really do some good controlled studies on this. But what we do know is that if teenagers are using screens within 30 minutes of their bedtime, they're actually not falling asleep. So screens usually need to be off at least half an hour before going to bed, preferably an hour. There's also some data that the type of things being used, so in particular violent video games, which is all the ones teenagers want to play probably. Like those ones are the ones we have some data that they also get away with sleep. A lot of the phones have automatically shifted to this turning off the blue light. And your phones probably do this too, you'll notice. You can set the time, maybe 7 o'clock, so it turns to a dimmer screen, because blue light disrupts essentially melatonin, and so it stops cueing your body to fall asleep. But we don't think that's great, but it's not enough. It's the stimulation of screens itself is also keeping kids awake, so it's not enough that the blue light goes off. We probably want some limits at home on screen use. There are companies that have some ways of controlling the internet, and I'm not paid by anyone to say these things. The one that I've got the more experience with is the Disney Circle. I don't know why Disney got involved with this. They just had some incentive, I guess, to help monitor screen use, and probably Disney shows are okay, and they don't filter those. Circle is a device that you put in your house, you connect it to your router, and it can monitor each device connected, and you can just automatically shut off Wi-Fi for it, for example. So you don't have to get into arguments with your kid, like, hand in your phone, please. You can just automatically shut it off. And assuming a lot of people here work at Microsoft and are a lot smarter than I am and have better solutions, that this is a solution. The other thing with screens is your kids will do what you do. So if you say, hand in your phone, you're not allowed your phone in your room at night, but you guys are allowed your phone in your room at night, they're smart, they're going to question that, and it's not going to go well. So I would advise for teenagers, whatever the limit is that you set with screens, you have that limit for yourself. So usually families sometimes like to have a little box they put their phones in before they go to bed, and even the parents. It's a good way of helping. The other thing is, as parents, perfection is awesome, but you're never going to achieve perfection. So striving for it with these interventions is what we go for. But it's okay if there are certain limits. We want to be a little bit flexible. Okay, so cognitive. We talked about when stress is high, one of the signs is kids go to that worst case place, right? And the outlook can get really, really negative, and they worry about a lot of different things. And your brains, you can they're a little more developed because you're adults. This frontal lobe is the part that hasn't developed in a teenager yet, which is why emotions tend to be a little higher. So you could be really good models for coping with stressful situations, cognitively. So how do you do this? There's a skill that I really like called cope ahead. Because what it allows you to do is say, you're worried about this test that's coming up, and you don't have enough time to do the test, to do the essay, and to go play sports. Now, you don't want to freak out with your kid when they're like, I've got all these things to do. You don't want to be like, how are you going to get this done? You need to be calm and composed. And we don't want to reassure them and say, don't worry, you're going to be fine. Right? Because that's probably a very natural response, but we're smarter than that. So we hear teens. They're freaking out. Right? They don't think they're going to be fine. So it's probably not that helpful, even though you probably know they're going to be fine. Instead, sometimes it can be helpful to cope ahead with them and think, all right, well, if that happens, what would you do? Right? How would you cope with that situation? And we know from interventions in anxiety treatment that coping ahead with a situation is actually, it gives a good sense of control to a teenager that like, okay, even if that bad thing happens, maybe I can deal with that situation. So if I do mess up on the test, because I didn't have enough time to study for it, because I was doing my essay instead, well, maybe I could talk to the teacher and see if I can resit it. Right? It gives a sense of control that they don't otherwise have, and it gives them a bit of ownership over this issue. So, thinking ahead in a calm way, how would you cope? It's not going to get anxiety to zero, right? Pretty much nothing you can do is going to get anxiety to zero, and that's okay. But it's going to get your kid's mindset in a much better place than where it would otherwise go, which is basically, I'm going to fail this test, I'm going to fail school, I'm going to drop out, I'm not going to go to college, I'm going to be homeless. And that's where they go. I've literally done that. So you've got to model balanced thinking. The other thing that can be really helpful is to validate. So if they come to you and I've got all these things, you don't have to jump and be the problem solver. The first thing you can say is something like, that sounds really hard, right? Or I'm hearing you're really stressed. A validating statement in itself lowers emotion. It communicates to your kid that you're hearing what they're saying, you're being calm. It gives you a good grounding place. So we want to validate emotion. We don't want to do what's called accommodating anxiety. So accommodating anxiety is, you're really worried about something, how can I solve this? How can I take away your anxiety? Because every part of your heartstrings are going to be tugged by this anxiety, and you're going to be thinking, how can I stop my child feeling distressed? Right? And I totally get why you would do that. It's because you're loving parents and you care about your kids and you don't want them to be distressed. Right? Like it's a natural response. However, if when your kids get anxious, you step in and you do something to take away their anxiety, they never learn to deal with anxiety on their own. So they never get the opportunity to sit in anxiety, to problem solve it for themselves, to see what happens to their anxiety. Because a lot of the time with anxiety, we know it often goes away on its own, just by being in the situation, or people sort of respond to the situation and pull through and do something that it wasn't that terrible and they learn from what happened. But if you're stepping in and removing that, then they never get a chance to learn. So sometimes this can be really hard for a lot of parents to enact, to instead validate an emotion and help them problem solve for themselves instead of jumping in and solving the problem for them. So sometimes I say to parents that have a hard time with this to think of it as like, if you step in and solve the problem and accommodate their anxiety, you are depriving them of their opportunity to deal with anxiety. And I think thinking of it that way can help you think, this is actually really important that I let my child be a little anxious and deal with this on their own. The other thing with cognitive coping, one of the biggest stresses that kids face is, I have to get a 4.0. My parents would kill me if I don't get A's. And there's a lot of, whether you actually even explicitly say get 4.0 or not, like a lot of kids have this pressure to get a 4.0, and they probably, even if you're saying, it's okay if you get B's and C's, just try your best. If you're working at like a high-tech company, or like that, your kids are going to look and think, well, they're a success. Look at my parents doing awesome. How am I going to live up to that? Right? They're going to see that. So it's okay that they want to get a 4.0. Your job is to, as much as you can, just express it's okay if you don't get a 4.0, because there's more to life than a 4.0. Malcolm Gladwell's book, David versus Goliath, is really good at explaining this concept, and he has the idea that it's actually better to be a big fish in a small pond. So he actually believes you're better off going to sort of a pretty average university than Harvard. Because if you go to Harvard, then you're a brilliant student, obviously, but now you're an average student within Harvard. And like that can be very challenging for some people. So he likes the idea of balanced lifestyle and outcomes. Like if we think of not just academic performance and income, but also mental health outcomes and well-being, can be a little better if we don't just strive for the 4.0, but we think about the other areas in our life, like sleeping enough, hanging out with friends, playing sport, sometimes just sitting on the sitting on the sofa watching TV. So I talked about this earlier. And we're going to go into problem solving in a bit more detail. So if you see that your child is overloaded, you see those signs of stress, or they're just telling you, I'm freaking out, I can't deal with this, it's time to maybe get to problem solving, because effective management of anxiety as an adult is done by good problem solving. And again, if you always problem solve for them, they do not learn to problem solve for themselves. So your job as parents is to help them figure out what am I going to do to solve this problem, and let them do it themselves. We'll talk about treatment of anxiety, but allowing them to do this thing called exposure, facing some of their fears, so they can. So, if you can teach your child to be an effective problem solver, then your child has much better control of their anxiety later on in life. Because when they get a problem, an anticipated threat, they can take effective steps to solve that problem themselves. If they never learn that skill, they just get anxious, and what will tend to happen is they might avoid the situation that makes them anxious. So I see, right, a lot of kids who might, for example, going to school becomes really hard when they get very stressed out, and the response is to avoid going to school. And it's about teaching kids to go face their fears, go see how we can get to school in some way, see how can I catch up on work I'm behind on, by contacting the teacher myself, for example, instead of my parents contacting the teacher for me. So these are very simple steps. Problem solving is not rocket science. But the skill is in the moment getting them to do it instead of you doing it. So what I would suggest, next time that you're noticing your child is stressed out or has anxiety, is to essentially say, again, a validating statement. It sounds like you're really anxious. Let's see what we can do about this. Why don't we write down some potential solutions to this problem, and then you can pick one, and let's see how it goes. And that's what problem solving is. So you're supporting your child, you're letting them know that you're there for them, but you're putting the change on them. They have to come up with some of the ideas, and then they have to go and enact those ideas. Okay, so what is the problem? They might come to you and say, well, here's the issue. I got test, essay, and spelling test all due. I'm going to fail. I'm essentially going to live on my brother's couch. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be easy to get caught up in, those things aren't going to happen. But think about what is the problem here. And the problem is, I have a test, an essay, and a spelling test. That's the actual problem that we're dealing with. So then it's getting your child to list out the solutions. And it doesn't matter, there's no good or bad solutions here, there's just solutions. We evaluate them once we've written them down. And these are all solutions. Like dropping out of school is a legit solution. It has a bunch of consequences to it. It's probably not what we want them to choose. But it's as well. And then when we've got them down, together you can pick a solution when you look at the pros and cons. And it's sometimes pretty easy, In this one, I chose focus on the essay, because that's what I would do. And of course, because it's a made-up example, I did great on the test as well. But I just picked a solution and tried it. And again, this sort of enacts like, okay, you're going to try one, maybe you'll fail the test, or maybe you will just get a B in the test or a C in the test. But nice job choosing. That's awesome. Go for it. And it sort of embodies that you're supporting your kid to make their own decisions and face those decisions. Okay. Sometimes you do all of these things. You validate, you help your child problem solve, you provide the resources for them to go and manage their own stress and anxiety. You model thinking, they're exercising, you've got screen limits, all of these things, and yet your kid's still really anxious and it's not going away. This is probably time to seek additional help, because sometimes these things aren't enough. So, if it continues, so it's getting in the way of life, can't go to school, can't hang out with friends, can't be part of sport, can't get on the bus to school, right? Getting out the car when you're dropping off at school, can't do those things, it probably suggests that anxiety is a problem, and this might be where additional help is needed. Exaggerated family accommodations, so that's where parents are doing a lot of things to make sure that their child's anxiety doesn't get out of control. That's what we call an accommodation. So if you are feeling heavily burdened and you think like you're doing way too much to make sure that your child's feeling okay, that might be a sign that more help is needed. Distress is really high. Try everything. So that might be time to seek not the management strategies, but the treatment strategies, and go and see someone. So treatment should be typically cognitive behavior therapy. And what we do for anxiety disorders should be exposure therapy based. So exposure therapy is facing your fear. For example, I mentioned the dog, the dog phobia. Exposure therapy would say, all right, we've got to go and be in a room with dogs. We've got to go to the dog park. We've got to pet dogs. We've got to let dogs lick our face. We have to learn that dogs are safe for the most part, right? And we have to learn to distinguish when dogs are safe and when they're not safe. That's what treatment would involve. Thinking of a school example, I work with a lot of kids who it's hard for them to go to school on time because the corridors are busy. Everyone's talking. What if they trip up? What if someone says something to them and some social anxiety, right? So exposure would say, okay, let's break that down into different steps. We probably need to learn to be around a lot of people and walk the halls and learn that that's safe. So we're going to do that a lot in different ways. With social anxiety, maybe we have to talk to a lot more people. And a therapist is going to be much more effective than a parent at getting their child to do that, because parents know nothing. Okay? Your kids say anything to you, you guys know nothing. It's just, you're handicapped by being parents, unfortunately. You might have all the right ideas. Exposure therapy is all about you go and face your fear, and you learn either that it's safe, that you can do it, or that you can tolerate it. And if you can learn any of those things, it doesn't become so much of a fear anymore. I used to hate public speaking. First time I ever did it, I was behind a podium like this, and I remember my leg was like independently going off. I looked totally calm, apart from my right leg, which no one could see. And I just had to do it. I had a job at university, and I had to talk to like 500 people multiple times. And I ended up loving it. It took about 5 or 6 goes, and then it just became not really that anxiety-provoking for me anymore, because I learned I didn't choke up. I might make a few mistakes, I might stutter, I might say things, but no one laughs at me when I do it, or I find it funny if I do mess up. I learned that it's okay. That's the essence of exposure therapy. Treatment should be fun, it should be supportive, it should be collaborative. Treatment with teenagers should also involve rewards, because facing their anxiety is something they might not want to do, and it's really hard to go and face your anxiety. And so what we tend to do is, as well as the exposure, we build in a reward system, we build in a lot of encouragement and a lot of support. Okay, so I just listed a couple of books for if anyone is interested. The most common one I would recommend is Helping Your Anxious Child. I realize that doesn't show up that well, but it talks about all the different anxiety disorders. So if you do think that your child has some anxiety and you want some really concrete steps for what to do about that and when to seek more help, that's a really, really good book as a go-to. And the others are great too. I mean, none of these are bad. And then I also like these 2 books in general. So Spark is a book on the importance of exercise and the data behind it. And Why We Sleep is awesome on sleep recommendations in general. Here's some resources. I'll just leave that up if anyone wants to take a photo. And then I'm not going to have any questions. I think my time is up. But my email's up there. I will hang around here. But also feel free to email me. If a lot of you email me, it may take me a few days, so just be patient. But thank you very much. It's been